It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. The UK police have drawn condemnations for the arrest of dozens of people on the day of coronation of King Charles. Several British lawmakers and human rights groups have criticized the police approach. It came after police forces detained more than 50 people, including leading members of the anti-monarchy group Republic in London. Rights groups have labeled the arrest incredibly alarming and a dangerous precedent. According to the police, the people were held for alleged affray, public order offences, and breach of peace. The arrest came days after the government granted new anti-protest powers to the police forces.
Britain now has a new king. At the first coronation the world has seen in 70 years, the Archbishop of Canterbury crowned British royals Charles and Camilla at Westminster Abbey on Saturday, ushering in the reign of King Charles III. The main focus of British state media was the splendour and grandeur of the spectacle. However, controversy still surrounded the day. Anti-monarchy activists belonging to the peaceful Not My King protest movement were rounded up and arrested ahead of the coronation. The arrests included group leaders.
It's a completely peaceful demonstration. The police, without telling us why, without telling us where they're taking them, have arrested all the rallying organisers. They've seized all our placards. It feels like something out of a police state because we still don't know why anyone's been arrested, and we still don't know where they're taking our people. You know, Britain's meant to be a democracy, but Charles isn't treating it like one.
Even before the event took place, criticism of the royal family remained relatively widespread. A survey by the National Centre for Social Research showed public support for the monarchy has fallen to a historic low. A total of 45% of respondents said either it should be abolished, was not at all important, or not very important. Young people particularly expressed embarrassment over the institution's continued existence. Elsewhere, similar polling revealed that many of the King's subjects across the Commonwealth would vote to remove the UK monarch as their head of state, raising speculation that more nations will ditch the Commonwealth in the near future. The ongoing cost of living crisis, undemocratic power, and seemingly endless scandals are among the many reasons experts believe the UK royals' popularity has plummeted.
I don't think anyone can be happy, especially looking at the economic state right now. Well, you only have to go out to the streets and some of the famous streets in London and look how many people are suffering and sleeping on the streets. And that is quite embarrassing and appalling for any sort of government, let alone a monarchy, to be proud to celebrate and spend that amount of money when people are suffering.
Wide on many mainstream platforms. So what the royal family stands for today might be different, but it's very, very difficult to erase history. And they have to respect that a large portion of the public still connect them to, let's say, some incredibly sad, vicious and violent times.
The new monarch now faces many challenges, and they're not just including the social, economic and political crises which plague the nation, but also the deep divisions within his own family as well. Depending on how the king handles these many crises could heavily impact the fight for survival that the royal institution now finds itself in. Robert Carter, Press TV, Windsor.
Let's bring in Rodney Shakespeare, Professor of Economics, who joins us from London. We also have David Miller, academic, broadcaster, and investigative researcher, who joins us from Bristol. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Rodney Shakespeare, I'll first start with you. Taking a look at the economics of this in terms of the finances, I should say, I'd like to get your idea on this, which is said to be roughly about £150 million that was spent on this. The timing, of course, couldn't be any worse based on the cost of living crisis that many Brits are experiencing. Doesn't this play a factor in the psyche of Brits when they take a look at this whole show that was put on?
Yes, of course. There's the economics and there's the show. But we're actually talking about the demonstrations of people being arrested. And the issue here is not about whether you support the monarchy. Many people do. It's not about whether there was any disturbance which might panic the horses, which could be very dangerous. It's about the fact that people were arrested for demonstrations which had been agreed with the police long beforehand. And if I may say so, it's not even about the arrests at those demonstrations. You see, there's been a new law passed, the Public Order Act, and it is being used against not only people protesting lawfully against the coronation. It is being used against those protesting about the environment, about poverty, and it's being done in circumstances where there is protest going right the way across Europe, and the censorship coming from the mainstream journalistic organizations and the social conversation organizations is absolutely incredible. The biggest issue of all is they're not discussing the basis of the inflation, which is the eastward march of NATO. So behind this, you're on these demonstrations, which were lawful and agreed with the police, you've got this harder line, this more violent line, and that is a reflection of the increased censorship at a time where the issues are getting more sensitive and there's more distress, and as you are indicating, people financially are coming under pressure.
All right, let's talk about this a little bit further with you, David Miller, the Public Order Act, of how that, in a sense, it does suppress opposition in terms of protests. I guess that's what they're trying to do. Tell us what you think this does, and of course, at the same time, how the UK has been very critical of other countries, and in particular, the Islamic Republic, when it had its riots on the streets, and how it condemned the way that the authorities here, especially the security apparatus, dealt with it. But in particular, how that pans out in the UK.
So, I mean, I think the widening of the lens on this is appropriate, because this is about a collapse of the last vestiges of democracy. And democracy was never really a very strong species in the UK, but this is about the collapse of those last vestiges, so that we can have banners removed by large phalanxes of police officers simply for being displayed on a public occasion, in the context where, of course, we have journalists, in particular Julian Assange, locked up for nothing for 4 years now. I mean, this is as we've just been seeing, a Europe-wide problem, which is to do with the US and to do with the war in Ukraine, where democracy, the last shreds of democracy are collapsing everywhere. So you can be arrested now in many European countries for having a vague view that Russia is not the baddie in the Ukraine conflict. Now, of course, this contrasts, as you say, with the treatment of the British government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, where, of course, there were riots, etc., last year, much of which was created and prompted by the US, by the CIA, and with some support from the Zionist entity of Israel. So, I mean, this is obviously a matter of hypocrisy, but all through the country in the UK, we've seen various ways in which protest has broken out. Yes, of course, there have been the protesters on the day who've been arrested, but we've seen at football matches in Glasgow, in Liverpool, the fans chanting against the coronation, and indeed urging country to feed the poor. There have been political demonstrations in Scotland yesterday where "Not My King" was the chant, which was to the forefront of the march. So this is a widespread phenomenon of disdain for the monarchy, and it's dangerous for them. But it's in a historical period where the power of the West is declining, and where we will probably see members of the Commonwealth removing the king as the head of state, as the power of the UK as a kind of loyal ally and asset of the US is on the wane. So this is a very dangerous time for the ruling elite, and of course they will use that to lash out against the public should they not toe the line.
Is it correct, Rodney Shakespeare, based on what you have said and also what David Miller there said, that what is in a bigger picture important to highlight, which I'm going to ask you to do for us, the notion of democracy to be degraded in the UK, and it's been on this path? Maybe you can tell us if you agree, first of all, with that or not, and instances where that has led to the UK being viewed as a demoting democracy that is clamping down even harsher when it comes to its citizens.
Well, I would just take one thing that David Miller said. He said many. he referred to Julian Assange. And his alleged crime was that he revealed the machine gunning of Iraqi citizens from a helicopter. And that, it tells you really what it's all about. There's an increased repression going on, an increased censorship, an increased violence against legitimate demonstrations, and particular increased pressure against legitimate journalism. So David Miller went through the issues, but it's much broader, it's much serious, and we're going into a time when the pressure on ordinary people is going to get very much worse.
And David Miller, what do you think? I mean, at this point, officials in charge have clamped down when it comes to protests in general, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any reprieve, at least in the near future, based on, for example, this cost of living crisis. Do you think that things will get worse, and are they going to get better?
I mean, I think that the dissent that there is in the country in relation to the Conservative Party will increase. Of course, there is no real alternative in this country, given the Labour Party is effectively another kind of Tory party. But the key thing that's changing is the geopolitical situation. As we move towards multipolarity at an increasing speed, we're going to see consequences of that multipolarity feeding back into the UK, such that it will be much more difficult for the UK state to do what it wants. And that's the key, it seems to me, for the future. Not necessarily the question of the opposition inside this country, but the way in which multipolarity feeds back, and the newly resurgent countries of Russia, of China, of India, indeed of Iran, Brazil too, are making the history here and moving things in a way which is really quite dramatic, and which will lead to the leaking away of UK power and US power, and indeed, of course, of the power of Europe vis-à-vis the UK, because of the attack by the Americans on European economies, not least through the Nord Stream pipeline. So there's a real ferment of change happening, which we haven't seen the like of for many, many years, and that will have the biggest and most dramatic effect, I think, on politics in the UK.
Thank you very much for that, David Miller, academic, broadcaster, and investigative researcher. Rodney Shakespeare, thank you, Professor of Economics from London. With that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.